story, the piano's voice carried through the cracked shutters of the Iron Bell Tavern every night at sunset. And Orla Thane had been standing in the dirt road outside for 3 weeks, listening to a man play his heart out to empty chairs before she finally gathered the courage to push open the door with tears streaming down her face. The music stopped the instant the hinges creaked. She stood in the threshold, backlit by the purple remains of daylight, and felt her breath catch in her throat as the man at the piano turned to look at her. He was human, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that held the kind of weariness that came from carrying grief so long it had become part of his bones. His hands were still hovering over the keys, frozen mid-phrase, and for a long moment neither of them moved. "I'm sorry," Orla managed, her voice thick with emotion she had not meant to show. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not interrupting anything," the man said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made her believe him. "There's no one here to interrupt." She knew that already. She had listened from outside for weeks, hearing the music pour through the walls into the empty street, wondering who would play with such passion for an audience of ghosts. The tavern had been shuttered since late summer, its windows dark, its sign hanging crooked on rusted chains. The whole town knew the Iron Bell was closed, that Benedict Sawyer had locked the doors after his business partner died, and had not served a single customer since. But every evening at sunset he came here anyway, climbed the steps to the second floor where the piano stood, and played until the stars came out. Orla had been drawn to the music like a moth to flame, stopping on her way back from the fields each evening to stand in the shadows and listen. She worked on a farm just outside town, one of the few places that would hire an orc woman without asking too many questions. The pay was poor and the work was hard, but it was better than the alternative, better than the roads and the hungry nights and the towns that ran you off before sunset. She had thought she would move on when winter came, drift south to somewhere warmer, somewhere that might feel less like an ending. But then she had heard the piano, and something in the music had reached inside her chest and taken hold, and she had stayed. Tonight the grief had risen up in her throat like flood water, sudden and overwhelming, and she had found herself walking up the steps and pushing open the door before her mind could catch up with her body. Now she stood frozen in the doorway, tears running hot down her green cheeks, feeling exposed and foolish and utterly unable to turn around and leave. "Come in," Benedict said, and his voice was gentle. "Please." She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The tavern was dim, lit only by the oil lamp burning on top of the piano and the last dregs of daylight filtering through the shutters. Dust motes drifted through the air like tiny spirits. The tables and chairs were still arranged as if waiting for customers, though everything was covered in a thin layer of neglect. Behind the bar, bottles stood in neat rows, their labels faded, their contents slowly evaporating in the dry autumn air. The piano was beautiful, a grand instrument with dark wood polished to a soft gleam. It was the only thing in the room that looked cared for, the only thing that had been touched recently. Benedict sat on the bench with his hands in his lap, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "I've heard you out there," he said. "Every night for weeks I wondered when you'd come in." Orla felt her face heat despite the tears. "I didn't mean to intrude on your privacy." "You weren't intruding. The music goes where it goes." He gestured to the empty room. "I play for no one. If someone listens, that's their business." She moved closer, her boots loud on the wooden floor. Up close, she could see the fine details of the piano, the ivory keys worn smooth by countless hours of practice, the music stand empty of sheet music. He played from memory then, or from his heart. She wondered which. "Why do you play here if no one's listening?" she asked, then immediately regretted the question. It was too personal, too intrusive, but he had opened the door and invited her in, and now the words were out in the world between them. Benedict looked at the keys for a long moment. "Because I don't know how to stop," he said finally. "And because this place deserves to have music in it, even if there's no one here to hear." Orla understood that in a way she had not expected to. There were things you did not because they made sense, but because stopping would mean admitting something you were not ready to admit. She had been running for 2 years now, ever since the fire, ever since the night everything had burned and she had lost the only family she had ever known. She worked and she moved and she kept her head down, and she did not stop because stopping would mean facing the enormous empty space inside her chest where her sister's laughter used to live. "May I sit?" she asked, gesturing to one of the chairs near the piano. "Of course." He turned back to the keys, his fingers finding their places like birds returning to familiar branches. "You have a request. I don't know any songs by name," she admitted. "Just play whatever you were playing before." He nodded and began again, picking up the melody where he had left off. It was a slow, haunting piece, full of longing and sorrow and a kind of beauty that hurt to hear. Orla sank into the chair and let the music wash over her, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to simply feel everything she had been holding back. The tears came harder now, streaming down her face unchecked, and she did not try to stop them. Here in this empty tavern with this sad-eyed man and his piano, she could finally let herself break apart a little. When the song ended, Benedict did not stop. He moved seamlessly into another piece, this one faster, more urgent, like a conversation with someone who was no longer there. His hands danced across the keys with a skill that spoke of years of practice, of a love for the music that went deeper than mere hobby. Orla watched his face as he played and saw the way his expression shifted with the melody, the way he seemed to disappear into the music like a man diving into deep water. She did not know how long she sat there listening. The light outside faded to full darkness, and the lamp on the piano cast strange shadows across the walls. Benedict played song after song, never pausing, never looking up, and Orla listened with her whole heart laid bare. At some point the tears stopped, leaving her feeling hollow and clean like a vessel that had been emptied out and rinsed. When he finally stopped, the silence was deafening. Benedict flexed his fingers and looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw recognition in his eyes. Not of her specifically, but of what she was carrying. He understood grief the way only someone who had lived inside it could understand. "Thank you," Orla said quietly, "for letting me listen." "Thank you for coming in," he replied. "I didn't realize how much I needed someone to hear it." She stood, suddenly aware of how late it must be. "I should go. I have to be up early for work." "Where do you work?" "Thatcher's farm, about 2 miles east. I do whatever needs doing. Right now it's mostly the harvest." Benedict nodded. "Old Thatcher's a fair man from what I hear." "Fair enough." She moved toward the door, then hesitated. "Will you be playing tomorrow night?" "I play every night," he said. "Same time. May I come back?" Something shifted in his face, a tiny crack in the armor of his loneliness. "I'd like that." Orla walked back to the boarding house where she rented a tiny room, and for the first time in months she slept without nightmares. She came back the next night, and the night after that, and the night after that. It became a routine as natural as breathing. She would finish her work in the fields, wash the dirt from her hands and face at the pump outside the boarding house, and walk through town to the Iron Bell just as the sun was setting. Benedict would already be there, waiting at the piano, and he would nod when she came in and begin to play. At first they did not talk much. The music was enough, filling the space between them with everything that words could not say. But gradually, carefully, they began to open up. On the fourth night, Benedict told her his name and she told him hers. On the seventh night, he asked about her life, and she told him about the farm, about the small kindnesses and the casual cruelties she encountered in a town that barely tolerated her presence. "They pay me fairly," she said, sitting in her usual chair while he took a break from playing. "But they don't look at me. They talk around me like I'm furniture. The other workers eat their lunch together in the shade of the barn, and I eat alone by the fence." "That must be lonely," Benedict said, and there was real empathy in his voice. "I'm used to it. Orcs aren't exactly welcome most places." She shrugged, trying to make it sound casual, but she could tell he saw through the gesture. "What about you? Why did you close the tavern?" His face shuddered immediately, and she knew she had pushed too hard. But after a moment he sighed and looked down at his hands. "My business partner died," he said quietly. "We ran this place together for 5 years. He handled the customers and the food, and I handled the books and the music. We made a good team." "I'm sorry," Orla said, and meant it. His name was Marcus. Marcus and I grew up together, joined the territorial militia together, came back from the border wars together. When we mustered out, we pooled our savings and bought this place. We were going to make it the best tavern in the territory. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. And for a while we did. People came from 3 towns over to hear the music and taste Marcus's cooking. We were doing well. We were happy. "What happened?" "Fever," Benedict said flatly. "Last summer. It swept through town and took a dozen people. Marcus was one of them. He was sick for 3 days and then he was gone." Orla felt her throat tighten. "And you closed the tavern." "I locked the doors the day after his funeral, told myself it was just temporary, that I needed time. But then days became weeks, and weeks became months, and I couldn't make myself open those doors again. Every table, every chair, every bottle behind the bar reminds me of him. I can't serve drinks in the place where we used to laugh together. I can't smile at customers and pretend everything is fine when nothing is fine." "But you still come here," Orla said gently. "I still come here." Benedict looked at the piano and his expression softened. "This was Marcus's gift to me 3 years ago. A real grand piano, shipped all the way from the eastern cities. Cost him nearly everything he'd saved, but he said the tavern needed proper music, and I needed a proper instrument. I played every night while people ate and drank and talked. The piano was the heart of this place. And now you play for ghosts." "I play because I have to," he said. "Because if I stop, if I let the silence win, then the tavern really is dead. As long as there's music here, as long as someone remembers what this place was, then maybe it's not completely gone." Orla understood. She had her own ghosts, her own ways of keeping the dead alive. "Tell me about him," she said. "Tell me what he was like." And so Benedict talked and Orla listened, and the empty tavern held them both in its dusty embrace. He told her about Marcus's terrible jokes and his brilliant cooking, about the way he could charm anyone into staying for just one more drink, about the dreams they had shared for the future. He told her about the fight they'd had the week before Marcus got sick, a stupid argument about whether to expand the kitchen, and how Benedict would give anything to take back the angry words and tell his friend how much he mattered. When the words finally ran out, Benedict played again, and this time the music sounded different. Lighter somehow, as if speaking Marcus's name out loud had released some of the weight pressing down on his chest. "Thank you," he said when the last notes faded, "for listening to all of that." "Thank you for telling me," Orla replied. The night she told him about her sister, it was raining. Autumn had given way to the edge of winter, and cold water drummed against the roof and shutters while they sat together in the lamplight. Benedict had just finished playing a lively tune, something with a melody that danced and skipped like a child running through puddles. And the contrast with the weather outside made Orla laugh despite herself. "I haven't heard you laugh before," Benedict said, looking at her with surprise and something else, something warmer. "I don't do it much anymore," she admitted. "But that song was joyful. It's hard not to respond to joy, even when you're determined to be miserable." "Are you determined to be miserable?" "Some days it feels easier than the alternative," he nodded slowly. "I understand that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rain. Then, without quite meaning to, Orla found herself talking. "I had a sister," she said. "Una. She was younger than me by 4 years, and she was everything I wasn't. Beautiful, charming, full of light. People loved her. Even humans who hated orcs would smile when Una walked by." "What happened to her?" Benedict asked gently. "Fire." The word came out flat, emotionless, but Orla could feel the grief beneath it like a frozen lake waiting to crack. "We were living in a settlement up north, one of the mixed communities where orcs and humans tried to coexist. It worked well enough most of the time, but there were always tensions. Some of the human families didn't want us there. They made that clear." She paused, gathering herself. Benedict waited without pushing, his presence steady and patient. "One night, someone set fire to the orc quarter. 3 buildings burned before anyone could stop it. Una was inside one of them. She'd gone to help an elderly neighbor who couldn't walk well. By the time I got there, the roof had already collapsed. They wouldn't let me go in after her. They held me back while I screamed her name, and then the whole building came down and she was gone." "Gods," Benedict breathed. "Orla, I'm so sorry." "They never found out who did it. The town council said it was probably an accident, a lantern knocked over. But I saw the way those buildings burned all at once, too fast to be natural. Someone wanted us gone and they got their wish. Most of the orc families left after that. I left too. I've been moving ever since, working whatever jobs I can find, trying to outrun the hole she left behind." "Is that why you came here? To this town?" "I came here because I was tired of running. I thought if I could just stop for a while, just rest, maybe I could figure out how to live with it." She looked at him, this human man who played piano for ghosts, and felt a connection she had not expected. "Then I heard you playing, and I realized I wasn't the only one trying to hold onto someone they'd lost." Benedict reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His fingers were warm and calloused from the piano keys. "Maybe we can help each other hold on," he said. "Or maybe we can help each other let go. I don't know which is right, but I know I'm glad you're here." Orla squeezed his hand, feeling something shift in her chest. For 2 years she had carried her grief alone, believing no one could understand. No one could reach across the divide of species and culture and pain to touch the raw place where her sister used to be. But Benedict understood. He carried his own raw places, his own ghosts, and together in this empty tavern they were learning to be less alone. The weeks passed, and autumn descended fully into winter. The first snow fell on a Tuesday evening, dusting the streets with white and turning the world quiet. Orla arrived at the Iron Bell to find Benedict standing at the window, watching the snow fall with an expression of profound sadness. "Marcus loved snow," he said when she came to stand beside him. "He'd always make hot cider on the first snow day and give it away free to anyone who came in. Said it was his way of welcoming winter." "That sounds like a good tradition," Orla said carefully. "I haven't made cider since he died. I haven't cooked anything in this kitchen since he died." Benedict turned away from the window, and Orla saw the depth of his exhaustion. "I thought I could keep this place alive with music alone. But it's not alive, is it? It's a mausoleum. I'm just a ghost haunting his own failure." "You're not a ghost," Orla said firmly. "You're grieving. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because from where I'm standing, it feels like I died the same day Marcus did. I just forgot to stop breathing." The despair in his voice frightened her. She had watched him over the past weeks, seen him come alive a little bit more each evening when she arrived, seen the music pull him back from whatever dark edge he had been standing on. But tonight the darkness was winning, and she did not know how to fight it. "Play something," she said. "Play something for Marcus." Benedict shook his head. "I don't think I can tonight." "Then let me stay anyway. We don't have to have music, we can just sit." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. They sat together at one of the tables, not touching, just existing in each other's presence while the snow fell outside. Orla told him about her day, about the old mare at the farm who had finally let her approach without shying away, about the way the children in town had thrown snowballs and laughed with such pure joy it had made her chest ache. Benedict listened without speaking, but she could feel him gradually coming back from wherever dark place he had gone. Eventually he got up and went behind the bar. She heard him moving around, heard the clink of bottles and the strike of a match. When he came back, he was carrying 2 mugs of steaming cider that smelled of apples and cinnamon and cloves. "To Marcus," he said, raising his mug, "and to Una. May they both know they're remembered." Orla raised her own mug, feeling tears prick her eyes. "To Marcus and Una." They drank together in the quiet tavern while the snow painted the world white outside, and it felt like a small kind of healing. The next evening, Benedict was at the piano when she arrived, and he played with a fierce intensity that filled every corner of the tavern. Orla listened, transfixed, as his hands flew across the keys, pulling music out of the instrument that seemed too big and too beautiful to come from any mortal source. When he finally stopped, she realized she was crying again. "I fell in love with you weeks ago," Benedict said without turning around. "I think I fell in love with you the night you stood outside in the dark and listened to me play for no one. I fell in love with your courage in coming through that door. I've been falling in love with you every night since." Orla's breath caught. She had known, on some level, that something was growing between them. She had felt it in the way their conversations had deepened, in the way his face lit up when she arrived each evening, in the warmth that bloomed in her chest whenever she thought of him. But hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that terrified her. "I'm an orc," she said, and hated how small her voice sounded. "The whole town barely tolerates me. If you're with me, they'll turn on you too. They'll never come back to the tavern. You'll lose everything." "I've already lost everything that matters," Benedict said, and now he did turn to look at her. "Except you. You're real and you're here and you make me want to keep breathing. I don't care what anyone else thinks. You should care. Your business, your reputation, your whole life is here. My whole life is sitting in that chair looking at me like I've just said something foolish." He stood up from the piano bench and crossed to where she sat. "Orla, I know this is complicated. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this shouldn't happen. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel. I can't keep playing music for ghosts when there's a living, breathing woman right in front of me who makes me feel alive for the first time in a year." She looked up at him, this human man with his sad eyes and his beautiful music, and felt something inside her chest crack open. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "I'm afraid of losing you the way I lost everyone else. I'm afraid of hoping for something good because every time I hope, it gets taken away." Benedict knelt in front of her chair so they were eye to eye. "I'm afraid too," he said. "I'm terrified, but I think being afraid together is better than being safe alone." Orla reached out and touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "I fell in love with you too," she said. "I fell in love with your music first, and then I fell in love with your heart. You're the kindest man I've ever met, and the saddest, and the bravest. You play piano in an empty tavern because you can't bear to let the music die. How could I not love you?" He kissed her then, soft and careful, and she kissed him back with all the longing and grief and hope tangled up inside her. When they finally pulled apart, they were both crying and laughing at the same time, overwhelmed by the enormity of what they had just admitted. "What do we do now?" Orla asked. Benedict took her hands in his. "I don't know, but we'll figure it out together." They sat together on the floor of the empty tavern, holding each other while the lamp burned down and the night grew late. For the first time in longer than either of them could remember, the silence felt comfortable instead of oppressive. They did not need music to fill the space between them anymore. They had each other. In the morning, reality came crashing back. Orla went to work at the farm, and Benedict stayed at the tavern, and they were both acutely aware that falling in love had not solved any of their practical problems. Benedict still had a shuttered business that was bleeding money, and Orla still had a precarious position in a town that did not want her. Loving each other did not change the fact that the bank was going to seize the Iron Bell if Benedict could not start making payments again. She thought about that all day as she worked in the cold fields, her hands growing numb despite her gloves. The tavern was Benedict's life, his last connection to Marcus and to the dreams they had shared. If he lost it, she did not know what it would do to him. But reopening meant facing everything he had been avoiding for a year. It meant walking past Marcus's empty chair and serving drinks to people who would remember when there were two partners running the place instead of one. It meant accepting that Marcus was gone and the world had moved on without him. That evening, she came to the tavern with a plan half-formed in her mind. Benedict was at the piano, but he stopped playing when she came in and looked at her with such warmth it made her heart stutter. "I've been thinking," Orla said, taking her usual seat. "About the tavern." Benedict's expression grew wary. "What about it? You said the bank is going to seize it if you can't start paying them again. When is that going to happen? End of the year?" "I have until the 1st of January to either start making payments or surrender the property." He rubbed his face tiredly. "That's 8 weeks away." "8 weeks is enough time," Orla said. "We could reopen." "Orla, I can't." "You can. You just don't want to." She held up a hand before he could protest. "And I understand why. I'm not judging you. But Benedict, you're going to lose this place and it's going to destroy you. I can see how much the Iron Bell means to you. If we don't at least try to save it, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." "Even if I wanted to reopen, I can't do it alone. Marcus ran the front of house. I don't know how to do what he did." "Then let me help you." Benedict stared at her. "What? Let me help you reopen? I can learn to serve drinks and manage customers. You can play piano and handle the business side. Between the two of us, we can make this work. You have a job. You have stability. Why would you risk that to help me with a failing tavern?" "Because I love you," Orla said simply, "and because I think we both need this. You need to find a way to move forward without forgetting Marcus, and I need to stop running from my grief. Maybe the way we do that is together here, making this place live again." Benedict was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "If we do this, if we really try, the whole town is going to know about us. They're going to see an orc woman working in the Iron Bell as a partner, not just hired help. They're going to talk. It could get ugly." "Probably," Orla agreed, "but I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of eating alone by the fence and pretending I don't exist. If we're going to be together, I want it to be real and public and without apology." "You're braver than I am." "No, I'm just more stubborn." She smiled at him. "What do you say? Will you let me help you save this place?" Benedict looked around the empty tavern, at the dusty tables and the shuttered windows and the beautiful piano that had become a monument to the past. Then he looked at Orla, this fierce orc woman who had walked through his door crying and had somehow become the most important person in his life. "Yes," he said, Let's do it. They started planning that very night. Benedict had been passively watching the tavern deteriorate for a year, but now he seemed to wake up, his mind sharp and focused as they talked through what needed to happen. The place needed to be cleaned from top to bottom, and the kitchen needed to be stocked, and the shutters needed to be opened to let light back in. They would need to spread word that the Iron Bell was reopening, and they would need to decide on a menu and prices, and a dozen other details. "I'll give notice at the farm tomorrow," Orla said. 2 weeks is standard. That gives us time to prepare before I start here full time. Are you sure about this? Once you quit, there's no going back. I'm sure. She met his eyes steadily. I've never been more sure of anything. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Orla worked her days at the farm, growing more and more eager to leave as her notice period ran down, and spent her evenings at the tavern helping Benedict clean and prepare. They scrubbed tables and washed windows and swept the floors until the place gleamed. Benedict went through the kitchen, throwing out anything that had spoiled and making lists of what needed to be purchased. Together they repaired a broken hinge on the front door and replaced the rope on the sign outside so it hung straight instead of crooked. Old Thatcher, the farmer who employed Orla, was not surprised when she gave her notice. "Figured you'd move on eventually," he said, not unkindly. "You're a good worker. I'll miss having you around." "Thank you for giving me a chance when no one else would," Orla said, and meant it. "You earned your place here. That's all that matters to me." He paused, then added carefully, "I heard rumors you've been spending time at the Iron Bell." "I have. Benedict Sawyer's a good man, lost and grieving but good. You could do worse." Orla felt her throat tighten. "Thank you. You be careful, though. Not everyone in town is going to be as understanding as me. There's folks who won't like seeing an orc working at a human establishment, especially not standing equal beside the owner." "I know. We're prepared for that." Thatcher nodded slowly. "Well, if you ever need anything, you know where to find me. My door's open." It was a small kindness, but it meant more than he probably realized. When Orla told Benedict about the conversation that evening, she saw relief flash across his face. "At least we'll have one friendly face in town," he said. They were sitting at the bar, taking a break from cleaning. Benedict had found Marcus's old recipe book in the kitchen and was paging through it with a bittersweet expression. "He wrote notes in the margins," he said, showing her a page covered in Marcus's sprawling handwriting. "Jokes, mostly, and observations about customers. Look, here he wrote, Mrs. Henderson claims she hates spicy food but always orders the hottest stew. I think she's in denial." Orla laughed. "He sounds like he had a good sense of humor." He did. He could make anyone laugh. Benedict traced the writing with one finger. "I think he'd like you. You have the same kind of stubbornness he had, the same refusal to give up even when things look impossible. I wish I could have met him." "Me too." Benedict closed the book gently. "But in a way, you're helping me honor his memory. He loved this place. He would want it to survive." "Then we'll make sure it does." On Orla's last day at the farm, the other workers threw a small goodbye gathering during lunch. It was awkward and brief, but several of them shook her hand and wished her well, and one young man gave her a loaf of bread his mother had baked. It was not much, but it was more acknowledgement than she had received in the entire time she had worked there, and she left feeling oddly touched. That evening, she and Benedict stood in the cleaned and polished Iron Bell and looked at what they had accomplished. The tavern looked alive again, ready to welcome people back through its doors. The piano gleamed in the lamplight, and the bar was stocked with fresh bottles, and the kitchen was ready to cook food for the first time in a year. "We're really doing this," Benedict said, sounding half amazed. "We're really doing this," Orla confirmed. "Tomorrow we open the doors." That night, Benedict did not play the piano. Instead, they sat together and talked about their fears and hopes for the coming day. They had decided to open for dinner service only, at least at first, serving a simple menu of stew, bread, and roasted vegetables. Benedict would cook following Marcus's recipes, and Orla would manage the front of house. And every evening, Benedict would play piano for whoever came to listen. "What if no one comes?" Benedict asked quietly. "Then we'll try again the next night and the next until they do," Orla said. "But I think people will come. This town loved the Iron Bell once. They'll love it again. What if they come but they won't accept you being here?" "Then we'll deal with it together." She took his hand. "We're partners, Benedict, in the tavern and in everything else. Whatever happens, we face it as a team." He kissed her then, deep and fierce, and she kissed him back with all the love and determination burning in her chest. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. "I love you," Benedict said. "I don't think I say that enough, but I do. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone." "I love you too," Orla replied. "Now let's go home and get some sleep. We have a big day tomorrow." The next evening arrived far too quickly. Orla spent the afternoon helping Benedict prepare food in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and stirring the huge pot of stew that would feed their first customers in over a year. Her hands were shaking, though she tried to hide it. Everything they had worked for, everything they had hoped for, came down to this night. At sunset, Benedict unlocked the front door for the first time in a year and pushed it open wide. Golden lights spilled out into the street, and the smell of cooking food drifted on the cold air. Orla stood behind the bar in a clean apron, her heart hammering in her chest. Benedict took his place at the piano and began to play, a warm, welcoming melody that carried out into the gathering darkness, and they waited. The first customer arrived half an hour later, an elderly man who shuffled incautiously and looked around with wide eyes. "Benedict," he said, his voice trembling. "Is it really open again?" "It is, Mr. Patterson," Benedict said, standing up from the piano. "Welcome back to the Iron Bell." Mr. Patterson's eyes landed on Orla, and she saw him take in her green skin and tusks with obvious surprise. "You've got help now, I see. This is Orla Thane. She's my business partner. Partner, not employee." Orla felt a surge of gratitude for the distinction. Mr. Patterson processed this, then nodded slowly. "Good. This place is too much for one person to run alone." He shuffled to a table and sat down with a sigh. "I'll have a bowl of stew and whatever you have on draft." Orla served him with hands that shook only slightly, and was rewarded with a surprised smile when he tasted the food. "This is Marcus's recipe," he said. "I'd know it anywhere. Good to have it back." 3 more people came in over the next hour, all of them regulars from before the closure. They were curious about Orla, their glances ranging from wary to outright hostile, but they were polite enough in their interactions. Orla served them and took their money, and tried not to let her nervousness show. Behind her, Benedict played piano, filling the tavern with music that reminded everyone of what the Iron Bell had once been. By the end of the evening, they had served 9 customers. It was not a lot, but it was a start. After the last patron left and they locked the door behind them, Benedict and Orla stood in the center of the tavern and looked at each other. "We did it," Orla said, laughing with relief and exhaustion. "We actually did it." Benedict pulled her into a tight embrace. "You were amazing. You're a natural at this." "I was terrified the entire time." "So was I, but we made it through." He pulled back to look at her face. "Tomorrow will be easier, and the day after that will be easier still. We just have to keep going." They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Each evening they opened the doors at sunset, and each evening a small but steady trickle of customers came through. Some were old regulars remembering better days, and some were curious newcomers who had heard the music and wanted to investigate. The food was simple but good, and Benedict's piano playing was extraordinary, and slowly word began to spread that the Iron Bell was worth visiting again. Not everyone was welcoming. There were customers who refused to be served by Orla, who demanded that Benedict bring their food instead. There were whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she approached, and looks of disgust or fear that made her want to hide behind the bar. One night, a drunk man called her a slur and suggested she go back to whatever hole she had crawled out of. Benedict threw him out personally, his usual gentleness replaced by a cold fury that surprised Orla. "No one talks to you that way in our establishment," he said when the man was gone. "Not ever. You'll lose customers if you defend me too vigorously," Orla warned. "Then we'll lose customers." "I don't care." He took her face in his hands. "You are my partner and the woman I love. Anyone who can't treat you with respect doesn't deserve to drink here." Despite the difficulties, there were bright moments too. Old Thatcher came in on their third week and made a point of shaking Orla's hand in front of the whole room. "Best worker I ever had," he announced to anyone listening. "You're lucky to have her, Benedict." A young human couple came in one evening and spent the whole night holding hands and gazing at each other while Benedict played love songs on the piano. When they left, the woman stopped to speak to Orla. "Thank you," she said quietly. "We heard this was a place where everyone was welcome, regardless of who they were. It means a lot to have somewhere we can just be ourselves." Orla understood then that they were building something bigger than just a tavern. They were creating a space where people who did not quite fit in elsewhere could find acceptance. It was a fragile thing, easily broken, but it was worth protecting. As winter deepened, and the year drew toward its close, the Iron Bell slowly came back to life. They were not yet making enough to cover all their expenses, but they were making progress. Benedict calculated that if they could maintain their current rate of growth, they would be able to start making proper payments to the bank by spring. It was not perfect, but it was hope, and hope was enough to keep going on the shortest night of the year. They closed early and sat together by the fire in the tavern's small back room. Benedict had spent the day cooking a special meal, and they ate together in companionable silence, exhausted but content. "Do you ever regret it?" Benedict asked. "Giving up your stable job to take a chance on this place?" "Never," Orla said firmly. "This is the first time in 2 years I've felt like I have a purpose, the first time I've felt like I belong somewhere. I'm glad." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't walked through that door crying. I think I would have let the bank take this place, let myself disappear. You wouldn't have disappeared. You're stronger than you think. Maybe, but I'm definitely stronger with you." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I want to ask you something, but I need to do it properly." "Will you come to the tavern with me?" Puzzled, Orla followed him out to the main room. Benedict lit the lamp on the piano and sat down at the bench. "I've been working on something," he said. "A new piece. I want you to hear it." He began to play, and Orla felt her breath catch. The melody was unlike anything she had heard from him before, sweet and aching and full of a love so profound, it made her eyes sting with tears. It was her story woven into music, the grief and the running and the night she had finally stopped outside an empty tavern to listen to a lonely man play piano. It was their story, the slow building of trust and friendship and love that had bloomed between them in this dusty old building. When the last notes faded, Benedict turned to look at her. "I call it Orla's song," he said, "and I wrote it to ask you a question." He stood and crossed to where she stood, frozen by the beauty of what she had just heard. Then, to her shock, he knelt down in front of her. "Orla Thane, you walked into my life when I had given up hope. You gave me a reason to open the doors again, to let light back into this place and into my heart. You are the bravest, kindest, most stubborn woman I have ever met, and I cannot imagine spending my life with anyone else." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple silver ring. "Will you marry me?" Orla's vision blurred with tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course, yes." Benedict slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, and they held each other in the center of the tavern while the lamp burned on the piano and the winter night pressed close around them. When they finally pulled apart, they were both laughing and crying at once. "I can't believe you wrote me a song," Orla said. "I can't believe you said yes." "Did you really think I'd say anything else?" Benedict smiled, and it was the first truly unguarded smile she had seen from him. "I hoped, but hope is a scary thing when you've lost as much as I have." "Hope is a scary thing when you've lost as much as either of us have," Orla corrected. "But we're done losing now. From here on out, we build something new together." They opened the doors on the first day of the new year with renewed determination. Benedict had made the bank payment, buying them another 6 months to get the business fully back on its feet. Word had spread over the winter that the Iron Bell was open again, and that first night of the new year they had more customers than they had ever had since reopening. Every table was full, and the piano music filled the room with warmth and life. Orla moved through the crowd serving drinks and food, and she noticed something remarkable. People were talking to her now, making eye contact, treating her like a person instead of an inconvenient obstacle. Old Mr. Patterson waved her over to introduce her to his grandson. The young couple from before asked about her ring and congratulated her when she told them about the engagement. Even some of the customers who had been hostile at first had softened, won over by weeks of consistent, friendly service. Benedict played Orla's song that night for the first time in public, and the whole room fell silent to listen. When he finished, there was a moment of hushed stillness before the applause began. Orla felt her face heat with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. This man had composed a piece of music for her, had put his love into notes and melody for the whole world to hear. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. After the last customer left that night, they counted the money together and realized they had made more in one evening than they had made in any entire week before. If they could maintain this level of business, they would not just survive but thrive. "We're going to make it," Benedict said, sounding stunned. "We're actually going to make it." "Did you ever doubt me?" Orla asked with a grin. "Never. I doubted myself, but never you." They fell into bed that night exhausted and happy, and Orla dreamed of music and laughter and a future that no longer felt impossible. The wedding was planned for late spring, after the mud season had passed, but before the summer heat arrived. They kept it small and simple, inviting only a handful of people they truly cared about. Old Thatcher agreed to stand as Benedict's witness, and a young orc woman who worked at the general store agreed to stand for Orla. It would be the first public orc-human marriage the town had ever seen, and they both knew it would cause talk, but they had long since stopped caring what the gossips thought. As spring arrived and the world turned green again, the Iron Bell continued to grow in popularity. Benedict expanded the menu, experimenting with new dishes while staying true to Marcus's core recipes. Orla proved to have a talent for remembering faces and names, making customers feel welcomed and valued. And every evening, Benedict played piano while people ate and drank and talked, filling the space with music that reminded everyone why they kept coming back. Not everything was easy. There were still nights when Benedict would stand in the kitchen staring at Marcus's recipe book and have to walk away before he broke down. There were still moments when Orla would hear a laugh that reminded her of Una and feel the grief rise up sharp and fresh. But they had each other now, and they had the tavern, and slowly the wounds that had once seemed unhealable began to close. One evening in early spring, a group of orc travelers came through town and stopped at the Iron Bell. They were merchants heading north to trade, and they looked surprised to find an orc woman working behind the bar. Orla served them with a mixture of pride and nervousness, aware that every eye in the room was on their table. The oldest of the merchants, a woman with gray streaked hair and laugh lines around her eyes, beckoned Orla over after the meal. "This is a good place," she said in the orc tongue, which Orla had not heard anyone speak in years. "You and your human have built something special here." "Thank you," Orla replied in the same language, feeling her throat tighten with emotion. "My daughter is thinking of settling in this region. May I tell her about this town, that there's at least one place where orcs are welcome?" "Yes," Orla said. "Tell her we're here, and that she'll always have a safe place at the Iron Bell." The merchants left the next morning, but word of the conversation spread through the tavern's regulars. Some people were uncomfortable with the idea of more orcs coming to town, but others saw it as a mark of pride that their tavern was becoming known as a place of acceptance. Benedict, when Orla told him about it, simply smiled and said, "Good. The more people who feel welcome here, the better." The week before the wedding, Benedict closed the tavern for the first time since they had reopened. It felt strange and risky to turn away business, but they both needed time to prepare for the ceremony and to simply be together, without the constant demands of running a public house. They spent the days cleaning and organizing, and the evenings sitting together talking about their future. They wanted children eventually, though they knew the children of mixed couples sometimes faced particular hardships. They wanted to expand the tavern, maybe add more rooms upstairs for travelers to rent. They wanted to become a gathering place for the whole region, somewhere people could come to feel less alone. "You think Marcus would approve?" Benedict asked one evening as they sat on the front steps watching the sunset. "I think Marcus would be proud of you," Orla said. "You took something that was dying and brought it back to life. That takes courage." "I had help." He squeezed her hand. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "We saved each other," Orla said. "That's what love is, I think. Showing up for someone when they need you most and trusting they'll show up for you too." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the sky a perfect blue bowl overhead. They were married in the tavern itself, with the piano as their altar and their small gathering of friends as witnesses. Benedict wore his best suit, and Orla wore a dress they had commissioned from the seamstress in town, a beautiful green that complemented her skin tone. She had never felt more beautiful or more nervous in her entire life. The ceremony was brief and heartfelt. They spoke their vows to each other in front of everyone, promising to love and support each other through whatever challenges the future might bring. When the officiant pronounced them married, Benedict kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world, and the small crowd erupted in applause and cheers. They served food and drink to their guests afterward, and Benedict played piano while people danced and celebrated. Old Thatcher got happily drunk and told rambling stories about his youth. The young human couple, who had been some of their first supporters, danced together with such joy it was infectious. Even the few orc guests who had come from neighboring towns seemed to relax and enjoy themselves, finding common ground with the human guests through shared food and music. As the evening drew late and the guests began to depart, Orla and Benedict stood together on the threshold of the tavern and watched people spill out into the warm spring night. The Iron Bell was full of life and light and laughter, exactly as it should be. "We did it," Benedict said, echoing Orla's words from that first frightening night they had reopened. "We actually did it." "We did," Orla agreed. "And we're going to keep doing it every single day." They closed the door and locked it, then turned to look at the tavern together. Tomorrow they would reopen and the work would begin again, but tonight was theirs alone. Benedict led her to the piano and sat down, pulling her onto the bench beside him. "Dance with me," he said, and began to play a slow, sweet waltz. "We can't dance here, there's no room," Orla protested, laughing. "Then we'll dance sitting down." They swayed together on the piano bench, completely ridiculous and completely happy, and when the song ended Benedict kissed her again and whispered, "I love you, Mrs. Sawyer." "I love you too, Mr. Sawyer," Orla replied, and felt the last piece of her broken heart slot back into place. Summer arrived in a blaze of heat and long golden evenings. The Iron Bell thrived, becoming busier than it had ever been even in Marcus's day. They hired a young man to help in the kitchen, and a teenage girl to assist with serving during the rush hours. Orla managed them both with a firm but kind hand, teaching them the skills Marcus had taught Benedict and Benedict had taught her. The orc merchant's daughter did come to town, and she brought her family with her. They opened a small leatherworking shop and became regular customers at the Iron Bell. More orcs followed, drawn by word that there was a town in the region that did not drive them away on sight. There was tension, certainly, and some families left rather than live alongside orcs, but most people adjusted. The Iron Bell became a neutral ground where humans and orcs could meet and find that they had more in common than they had differences. Benedict composed more music, pieces that became popular throughout the region. Traveling musicians would stop at the Iron Bell specifically to hear him play and to learn his compositions. He always introduced Orla as his wife and partner, and always played Orla's song at least once per night. It became the tavern's unofficial theme, the melody that everyone associated with the Iron Bell. On a warm evening in late summer, Orla realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but had not been sure, and now the midwife confirmed it with a smile and a pat on the hand. Orla walked back to the tavern in a daze, her mind spinning with the enormity of it. A child. Their child. A half-orc baby who would carry both their bloodlines and both their hopes for the future. She told Benedict that evening after they closed, pulling him aside in the quiet tavern and taking his hands in hers. "I have news," she said, and could not keep the smile off her face. "Good news or bad news?" Benedict asked, looking worried. "Good news. The best news." She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." For a moment Benedict just stared at her, processing the information. Then his face transformed, joy and wonder and a touch of fear all mixing together. "Really?" he breathed. "We're really going to be parents." "We really are." He pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. "I love you," he said fiercely. "I love you so much. We're going to be a family." "We already are a family," Orla corrected gently. "This just makes us a bigger one." They told their friends and employees the next day, and the news spread through the town like wildfire. Some people were scandalized by the idea of a half-orc child, but most reacted with the same warmth they might show any expectant parents. The young couple, who had been early supporters, came in specifically to congratulate them. Old Thatcher brought a carved wooden cradle he had made himself, claiming he had been saving it for a special occasion. Even the orc families in town celebrated, seeing the pregnancy as a sign of hope and integration. As autumn arrived and Orla's belly began to swell, life continued at the Iron Bell. She worked as long as she could, though eventually Benedict insisted she take more time to rest. They hired another server to pick up the slack, a middle-aged woman who had recently lost her husband and needed something to occupy her days. The tavern had become more than a business now. It was a community, a gathering place, a symbol of what was possible when people chose love over fear. The baby came on a cold night in late winter, arriving with a robust cry that filled the room with life. He was a boy, small and perfect, with his mother's green skin and his father's dark hair. They named him Derek, and Benedict cried when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed by the miracle of this tiny person they had created together. Derek grew healthy and strong, and the Iron Bell adapted to having a baby in residence. Customers delighted in watching him sleep in his cradle behind the bar, and more than one regular brought small gifts or toys. As he got older and more mobile, Derek became a fixture in the tavern, toddling between tables and charming everyone he met. He had his mother's stubbornness and his father's musicality, and he loved nothing more than sitting on Benedict's lap at the piano and banging on the keys. 2 years after Derek was born, Orla gave birth to a daughter they named Sira. She had her father's brown eyes and her mother's pointed ears, and she was quieter than her brother but no less determined. The Iron Bell now had 2 children running through its halls, and rather than driving customers away, the presence of the children seemed to make the place feel more like home. Benedict still played piano every evening, though now his audience included his own children dancing and clapping along. He had expanded his repertoire to include silly songs that made Derek laugh and lullabies that soothed Sira when she was fussy. Orla's song remained his signature piece, though, the one he always saved for the end of the night when things grew quiet and reflective. On the 5th anniversary of the night, Orla had first walked through the door crying. They closed the tavern early and had a private celebration. The children were with a babysitter, and Benedict and Orla sat together at the piano just as they had so many times before. "You remember that first night?" Benedict asked, playing a few idle notes. "When you came in and I had no idea my whole life was about to change." "I remember being terrified," Orla said. "I remember crying so hard I could barely see and feeling like if I didn't come inside right that moment I never would, and then I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened. I'm glad you were brave enough to open the door. I'm glad you were brave enough to let me in." She leaned against his shoulder. "We've built something amazing here, haven't we? Something neither of us could have built alone. We have." Benedict began to play Orla's song, the notes as familiar now as breathing. "And we're not done building yet. There's still so much future ahead of us." Orla listened to the music, thinking about everything they had survived and overcome, the grief that had nearly destroyed them both, the prejudice and fear they had faced from a town that did not want to accept them, the slow, patient work of building trust and community, and underneath it all, the love that had grown between a lonely human man and an orc woman who had stopped to listen to piano music on a dark street. "Play something new," she said when the song ended. "Something that's about right now, about this moment." Benedict thought for a moment, then began a new melody, something bright and hopeful and full of joy. It spoke of children laughing and customers gathering, and a tavern that had been brought back from the edge of death. It spoke of love that had survived everything the world threw at it and come out stronger on the other side. And it spoke of a future that stretched out before them, full of possibility and promise. When the last notes faded, Orla took Benedict's hand and led him upstairs to their living quarters above the tavern. Below them, the Iron Bell sat quiet and peaceful, waiting for tomorrow when the doors would open again, and the music would play and life would continue in all its messy, beautiful complexity. They had saved the tavern and saved each other, and in the process had created a place where anyone could walk through the door and find acceptance. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the deepening sky. Inside, the piano waited patiently for the next night's music. And upstairs, two people who had found each other in the darkness held each other close and dreamed of the dawn. Years passed, and the Iron Bell became a landmark in the region, known far and wide as the tavern where everyone was welcome, and the music was the finest you could hear outside the eastern cities. Benedict's compositions were published and performed by musicians across the territory, though he always said the best place to hear them was in the tavern where they had been written, played by the composer himself. Orla became a respected businesswoman, known for her fair dealing and her fierce loyalty to her community. Together, they raised their children and ran their business and loved each other through all the ordinary and extraordinary moments that make up a life. On an autumn evening many years after that first night when a crying orc woman had finally gathered the courage to walk through a door, the Iron Bell was packed to capacity. Every table was full, humans and orcs sitting side by side, eating and drinking and talking. Children ran between the tables, including Derek and Sierra, now teenagers helping their parents run the place. The air was thick with the smell of good food and the sound of laughter. Benedict sat at the piano, his hair now streaked with gray, his hands as skilled as ever. Beside him stood Orla, still beautiful, still strong, her small tusks showing when she smiled. He began to play, and the room gradually fell quiet as people recognized the opening notes of Orla's song. She listened with her eyes closed, remembering that lost, grieving woman who had stood outside in the darkness all those years ago, too afraid to come inside. She thought about her sister Una, whose memory had softened from a sharp ache to a gentle sadness. She thought about Marcus, whom she had never met but whose presence was still felt in every corner of the tavern. And she thought about how grief could transform into something beautiful if you gave it time and love and patience. When the song ended, Benedict looked up at her with the same love in his eyes that had been there from the beginning. "Thank you," he said quietly, though the whole room could hear in the sudden stillness, "for walking through that door, for staying, for building this life with me." "Thank you for playing music in an empty tavern," Orla replied, her voice thick with emotion. "For being sad and lonely and human enough that I couldn't help but come inside." He stood and kissed her there in front of everyone, and the tavern erupted in applause and cheers. Their children rolled their eyes with the particular embarrassment of teenagers watching their parents be affectionate, but they were smiling too. This was their family, strange and mixed and completely their own. This was their home, built from grief and music and stubborn hope. The celebration continued late into the night, and when the last customer finally left and they locked the doors, the whole family worked together to clean up. Derek and Sierra bickered good-naturedly over whose turn it was to sweep, while Benedict collected dirty dishes and Orla wiped down tables. It was ordinary and domestic, and exactly the kind of evening that Marcus would have loved, full of life and family and purpose. Later, after the children had gone to bed, Benedict and Orla stood together at the window looking out at the quiet street. The piano sat silent behind them, but they could almost hear the echo of music in the air, as if the building itself had absorbed all the songs that had been played within its walls. "You think we've done enough?" Benedict asked quietly. "Do you think we've honored the people we lost?" Orla thought about it carefully before answering. "I think we've done more than honor them," she said. "We've created something new from our grief, something living and breathing and full of love. Una and Marcus would both be proud of us." "I hope so." Benedict pulled her close. "I know I'm proud of us, of everything we've built together." They stood there in the darkness, Two people who had found each other at the worst moment of their lives and had chosen to build something beautiful from the wreckage. The Iron Bell would continue for generations, passed down through their children and their children's children, always a place where the lost and the lonely could find acceptance. And at the heart of it all would be the story of a man who played piano in an empty tavern every night, and the orc woman who finally came in crying, and how their love had transformed them both. The stars wheeled overhead, and the world turned toward morning, and inside the Iron Bell, two hearts beat in perfect time with each other, making their own kind of music that would never fade.